The briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command was filled with tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison studied the faces around the table, his most trusted SEAL team members. Each one a warrior who had seen more combat than most people could imagine. But today, they were all focused on the woman sitting at the far end of the conference table. She was small, maybe 5'4", with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were civilian. Dark jeans and a plain black sweater that looked like she had grabbed them from any department store. Nothing about her appearance suggested she belonged in this room full of elite military operators. Yet here she was, and according to their orders, she would be leading this mission. "Gentlemen, meet your new team leader," said Admiral Richardson as he entered the room. The SEALs exchanged glances. Team leader? This had to be some kind of mistake. The woman stood up slowly, her movements controlled and precise. When she spoke, her voice was calm and steady. "You can call me Sarah Chen. Some people know me by another name, but Sarah will work fine for now." Petty Officer First Class Danny Torres leaned back in his chair, making no effort to hide his skepticism. "Ma'am, with all due respect, what exactly is your background? We've never worked with you before, and this mission is pretty high stakes." Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My background is classified above your pay grade. Petty Officer Torres, what you need to know is that I've been doing this kind of work for 12 years. I've completed over 200 missions across 4 continents, and I've never lost a team member." The room fell silent. 200 missions was an impressive number, even for seasoned SEALs. But the team wasn't convinced. They had worked together for 3 years, and trust was everything in their line of work. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez spoke up next. "What kind of missions? Reconnaissance? Support? Because what we're looking at here is direct action against a heavily fortified compound." "I'm aware of the mission parameters," Sarah replied. "I've read the same intelligence reports you have. 3 American contractors taken hostage by a terrorist cell in northern Syria. The compound is protected by at least 30 armed guards, anti-aircraft weapons, and sophisticated alarm systems. The hostages are being held in the basement of the main building, and we have a 12-hour window before they're moved to an unknown location." Lieutenant James Walsh, the team's explosives expert, frowned. "If you know all that, then you know this isn't going to be a walk in the park. We're talking about a precision insertion, neutralizing multiple hostiles, and extracting 3 civilians without alerting half the Syrian army. That requires serious combat experience." Sarah walked over to the large map spread across the center of the table. She traced her finger along a route that led from the insertion point to the target compound. "The insertion will be here, approximately 2 kilometers from the target. We'll move on foot through this valley, avoiding the main road and the patrol routes that intelligence has identified." She pointed to a series of buildings on the map. "The compound has 4 main structures. Building 1 houses the guards' barracks. Building 2 contains the command center and communications equipment. Building 3 is the main residence where the terrorist leader stays. Building 4 is where the hostages are being held." Danny Torres interrupted. "We've already studied the layout, lady. What we want to know is whether you can handle yourself when things go bad, because they always go bad." Sarah looked at him directly, and for a moment, Torres saw something in her eyes that made him uncomfortable. It was the same look he had seen in the eyes of his most dangerous enemies. Calm, calculating, and completely without fear. "Things going bad is exactly why I'm here," she said quietly. "Admiral Richardson didn't assign me to this mission because he thought it would be easy. He assigned me because he knows what I'm capable of when everything falls apart." The Admiral stepped forward. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns, but Miss Chen comes with the highest possible recommendation. Her success rate is unmatched, and she has specific experience with this type of hostage situation." Rodriguez wasn't satisfied. "What agency is she with? CIA? DIA? Some kind of contractor?" "That information is compartmentalized," the Admiral replied. "What you need to know is that she has full authority over this mission. Her orders come directly from the Pentagon." The SEALs exchanged more glances. Pentagon authorization meant this was bigger than they had initially thought. But it still didn't explain who this woman was, or why she was being put in charge of their team. Sarah seemed to sense their frustration. Look, I know this is unusual. You're used to working with people you know and trust. But I'm not here to replace anyone or change how you operate. I'm here because I have specific skills that this mission requires. What kind of skills? Asked Walsh. For the first time since she had entered the room, Sarah hesitated. Let's just say that I have a particular way of getting into places where I'm not supposed to be. The rest of the briefing covered the standard mission details, equipment, timeline, extraction plan, and backup procedures. But the SEALs were only half listening. They were too busy trying to figure out who Sarah Chen really was and what she wasn't telling them. After the meeting ended and the Admiral left, the team gathered around their table while Sarah stepped outside to make a phone call. Danny Torres was the first to speak. I don't like it, he said, keeping his voice low. We don't know anything about her. For all we know, she could be some desk jockey who's never seen real combat. Mike Rodriguez nodded in agreement. The Pentagon sends people on missions all the time who look good on paper but can't handle the real thing. Remember that intelligence analyst they sent with us to Afghanistan? He froze up the moment we took contact. James Walsh was more thoughtful. But did you see the way she looked at the map? She wasn't just studying it. She was memorizing every detail. And when Torres challenged her, she didn't get defensive. That's not the behavior of someone who's inexperienced. Maybe not, said Torres. But it's also not the behavior of someone who's being completely honest with us. Rodriguez pulled out his phone. I'm going to make some calls, see if anyone I know has heard of a Sarah Chen. 200 missions is a lot of action. Someone has to know something about her. While the SEALs tried to gather information about their new team leader, Sarah was outside having a very different conversation. She had walked to a quiet corner of the base where she could speak privately. Yes, I'm with them now, she said into her phone. They're good operators. But they're suspicious. That's actually a good sign. It means they're careful. The voice on the other end was male, older, with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Do they need to know? Not yet, Sarah replied. If the mission goes according to plan, they'll never need to know. But if things get complicated. She paused, watching a group of Marines run past in formation. Let's just say they might get a bigger story than they bargained for. The package is secure? Sarah unconsciously touched the small device attached to her belt, hidden beneath her sweater. Always. Good. Remember, the primary objective is the hostages. Everything else is secondary. Understood. She ended the call and looked up at the clear blue sky. In 6 hours, she would be on a helicopter with 4 Navy SEALs who didn't trust her, flying toward one of the most dangerous places on Earth. They would expect her to prove herself, to show that she belonged on their team. What they didn't know was that she had been proving herself in situations exactly like this since she was 19 years old. They didn't know about the 12 years she had spent in places that didn't exist on any official map, working for an organization that had no name and left no traces. And they definitely didn't know why some people called her Falcon. Sarah walked back toward the building, already running through the mission in her mind. The insertion would be the easy part. A night jump from low altitude, using the latest stealth technology to avoid radar detection. The approach to the compound would be more challenging, requiring them to move through hostile territory without being detected by patrols or surveillance equipment. But the real test would come when they reached the target. The intelligence reports were good, but they were also 3 days old. The situation on the ground could have changed completely. The guards could be more alert, the hostages could have been moved, or the entire compound could be a trap. Sarah had learned long ago that no plan survived contact with the enemy. What mattered wasn't having the perfect plan, it was being able to adapt when everything went wrong. And in her experience, everything always went wrong. Inside the building, Mike Rodriguez had just finished his 3rd phone call. He rejoined Danny Torres and James Walsh, who were studying satellite images of the target compound. Well, Torres asked, did you find out anything? Rodriguez shook his head. It's weird. I talked to contacts at SOCOM, JSOC, and even a guy I know at CIA. Nobody's heard of a Sarah Chen. At least not one with the kind of background she claims to have. That could mean she's deep cover, Walsh suggested. Or it could mean she's lying. Or it could mean she works for an organization that doesn't officially exist, Torres added. There are plenty of those in our business. The three SEALs continued their discussion, but they were interrupted when Sarah walked back into the room. She seemed to sense that they had been talking about her, but she didn't appear concerned. Gentlemen, we have 4 hours until departure. I suggest you get some rest and check your equipment one more time. Once we're on the ground, there won't be any second chances. She moved to the equipment table where her gear was laid out. The SEALs watched as she systematically checked each item: her rifle, sidearm, ammunition, communications equipment, and various other tools that they couldn't immediately identify. What struck them was the way she handled each piece of equipment. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Her movements were those of someone who had done this routine thousands of times before. Every motion was efficient and purposeful. Danny Torres decided to try a different approach. Instead of challenging her credentials, he would test her knowledge. "Ma'am, what's your assessment of the guard rotation at the compound?" Without looking up from her equipment check, Sarah answered immediately. 2 guards at the main gate, rotating every 6 hours, 4 roving patrols, each covering a different sector, with approximately 15-minute intervals between passes. 2 snipers on the roof of Building 3. Though they may not be there during our insertion window, since the attack is scheduled for 0200 hours local time. Torres was impressed despite himself. She had memorized details that he had to refer to his notes to remember. What about contingency plans if the hostages aren't in Building 4? Building 2 has a basement level that wasn't fully mapped in the intelligence report. If they're not in 4, that's the most likely alternative location. Building 1 is too exposed, and Building 3 is where the leadership sleeps. Walsh jumped in with a technical question. The compound has backup generators. How do we ensure they don't restore power after we cut the main lines? We don't cut the main lines, Sarah replied, finally looking up. We use an electromagnetic pulse device to disable all electronic systems simultaneously. More effective and less likely to trigger manual backups. The SEALs looked at each other. EMP devices were cutting-edge technology, not standard issue for most military units. The fact that she had access to one suggested that she was connected to resources far beyond what they had initially assumed. Mike Rodriguez decided to ask the question that was really on all their minds. "Ma'am, I don't mean any disrespect, but we've all been doing this for a long time. We've worked with CIA, Special Operations Command, even some contractors, but we've never encountered anyone quite like you. Could you help us understand what makes you different?" 1. Sarah finished checking her equipment and turned to face the 3 men. For a moment, she seemed to be debating how much to tell them. "Sergeant Rodriguez, have you ever heard of the term gray operations? Operations that exist in the space between official and unofficial," he replied. "Missions that can't be acknowledged, but can't be ignored." "Exactly. For the past 12 years, I've specialized in gray operations. Situations where traditional military or intelligence approaches won't work, places where the rules are different, and normal procedures will get people killed." She gestured toward the map of Syria. "This mission fits that category perfectly. The compound is in an area where we can't use overwhelming force without creating an international incident. The hostages are being held by people who won't hesitate to kill them if they feel threatened, and the window for action is closing rapidly." Danny Torres frowned. "So what makes you think you can do what we can't?" Sarah's smile returned, and again, it didn't reach her eyes. "Because I don't think like a soldier. Petty Officer Torres. I think like a hunter." The room fell silent again. There was something in the way she said the word hunter that made all 3 SEALs uncomfortable. It suggested a level of ruthlessness that went beyond normal military training. James Walsh decided to change the subject. What's our extraction plan if everything goes sideways? Everything will go sideways, Sarah said matter-of-factly. It always does. That's why we have 3 different extraction points and 4 different routes to reach them. But honestly, if we do our job right, extraction should be the least of our problems. She checked her watch. 3 hours until departure. I recommend you get some food and rest. And, gentlemen? She looked at each of them in turn. I know you have reservations about working with me. That's smart. Trust should be earned, not assumed. But I need you to know that getting those hostages out alive is the only thing that matters to me. Everything else is negotiable. With that, she left the room, leaving the 3 SEALs alone with their thoughts and more questions than answers. Outside, Sarah found a quiet spot where she could think without interruption. The mission ahead was dangerous. But that wasn't what concerned her. She had been in dangerous situations before. Many times. What worried her was the possibility that this mission might require her to reveal capabilities that she had worked very hard to keep secret. The device on her belt was warm against her skin, a reminder of exactly how different she was from the men she would be working with. They were excellent soldiers, trained to handle almost any situation through superior tactics and overwhelming firepower. But Sarah had been trained for situations where tactics and firepower weren't enough. She had been trained for impossible situations, where the only way to succeed was to do things that other people couldn't do, things that had earned her a very different kind of reputation. As she prepared for the mission ahead, Sarah Chen allowed herself to remember the last time someone had called her by her real nickname. It had been 2 years ago. In a classified operation in Eastern Europe, her partner had been pinned down by enemy fire, badly wounded and unable to move. The extraction team was 30 minutes away, and the enemy was closing in fast. By all logical calculations, there was no way to save him. But logic had never been Sarah's strength. Her strength was doing the impossible. The enemy soldiers never saw her coming. One moment they were advancing on her wounded partner, confident in their superior numbers and firepower. The next moment, they were facing something that moved through their ranks like a force of nature, silent and deadly and utterly unstoppable. When the extraction team finally arrived, they found Sarah's partner safe and all 8 enemy soldiers dead. There were no bullet wounds, no explosion damage. The enemy had simply been eliminated with surgical precision. The extraction team leader had looked at the scene and shaken his head in amazement. "Jesus Christ, Falcon," he had said. "How the hell do you do it?" That was the last time anyone had called her by that name during an active mission. Since then, she had worked very hard to keep her true capabilities hidden, to operate within normal parameters whenever possible. But tonight, in a hostile compound in Syria, with 3 American lives hanging in the balance, Sarah had a feeling that hiding might not be an option. The SEALs were about to learn why some people called her Falcon, and more importantly, they were about to learn what she did to earn that name. The helicopter flew low across the desert landscape, its rotors cutting through the night air with mechanical precision. Inside the cabin, 4 Navy SEALs and 1 mysterious woman sat in complete darkness, each lost in their own thoughts about the mission ahead. Sarah Chen sat perfectly still, her breathing controlled and even. To an outside observer, she might have appeared to be sleeping. But the SEALs had noticed that her eyes moved constantly beneath her closed lids, as if she were running through complex calculations in her mind. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison's voice crackled through their headsets. 5 minutes to drop zone. Final equipment check. The team went through their gear one last time. Each SEAL carried an HK-416 assault rifle, a Sig Sauer P-226 sidearm, night vision equipment, communications gear, and specialized tools for their individual roles. Danny Torres had additional reconnaissance equipment, Mike Rodriguez carried extra medical supplies, and James Walsh had his explosives kit. Sarah's loadout was different. Her primary weapon was a compact rifle that none of the SEALs recognized, painted in a matte black finish that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her sidearm was equally unusual. A pistol, with what appeared to be a custom suppressor and some kind of electronic sight system. But what really caught their attention was the small device attached to her belt. It was about the size of a smartphone, but thicker, with a series of blinking lights that pulsed in a steady rhythm. When Danny Torres had asked about it earlier, Sarah had simply said it was mission essential equipment. 2 minutes, Morrison announced. Remember, radio silence unless absolutely necessary. We go in quiet. We get the hostages, and we get out. The helicopter began to slow, and the crew chief opened the side door. A rush of cold desert air filled the cabin, carrying with it the scent of sand and distant smoke. Far below, the landscape was a patchwork of shadows and moonlight. 30 seconds, Morrison called out. Check your altimeter and prepare for drop. Each team member stood and checked their parachute equipment one final time. They would be jumping from 1,500 feet, high enough to avoid ground-based detection, but low enough to minimize their time in the air. Go, go, go. One by one, the team members leaped from the helicopter into the darkness below. Sarah went last, her form disappearing into the night like a ghost. The landing was perfect. The team touched down in a small valley, approximately 2 kilometers from the target compound, exactly as planned. Within minutes, they had gathered their chutes and buried them under rocks and sand. Morrison checked his GPS and pointed toward a ridge that ran along the eastern edge of the valley. We follow that ridge line for 1 kilometer, then cut west toward the compound. Stay low, watch for patrols, and maintain 10-meter intervals. They began to move across the desert terrain, their movements silent and coordinated. The SEALs had done this kind of approach countless times before, but they found themselves watching Sarah carefully, curious to see how she would perform under real conditions. What they saw surprised them. Sarah moved through the darkness like she had been born to it, her footsteps completely silent, even on loose sand and rocky ground. More than once, she spotted potential hazards, a tripwire here, a pressure plate there, before any of the SEALs noticed them. After 45 minutes of careful movement, they reached a position overlooking the target compound. Morrison pulled out his binoculars and began studying the layout, comparing what he saw to the intelligence photographs they had memorized. 2 guards at the main gate. As expected, he whispered into his radio. I can see the roving patrol on the north side. Building 4 appears to be our target. Sarah was lying beside him with her own optics, but she was focused on details that the SEALs hadn't considered. The guard rotation is off, she said quietly. It should have changed 20 minutes ago, but the same 2 men are still at the gate. Rodriguez frowned. Maybe they're running late? Or maybe something has changed, Sarah replied. Look at their body language. They're more alert than they should be for a routine night shift. The SEALs looked more carefully and realized she was right. The guards were scanning their surroundings constantly, and they were holding their weapons in a ready position rather than casually. Could be nothing, Morrison said, though he didn't sound convinced. Or it could be that they know something is coming. Either way, we proceed with the mission, Sarah said. But we need to be prepared for the possibility that this is a trap. Torres spoke up. If it's a trap, shouldn't we abort and call for backup? Sarah turned to look at him, and in the darkness, her eyes seemed to reflect the moonlight like an animal's. Petty Officer Torres, those 3 hostages will be dead by tomorrow night if we don't get them out tonight. Backup isn't an option. Morrison made the decision. We continue, but we modify the approach. Instead of going through the main entrance, we'll breach the compound from the south side where the wall is lower. They spent another 10 minutes studying the compound and finalizing their approach route. Then they began the careful process of moving closer to their target. The compound was surrounded by a concrete wall approximately 8 feet high, topped with razor wire. Floodlights illuminated the corners, but there were shadows between them that could provide concealment for anyone skilled enough to use them properly. Sarah was the first to reach the wall. She pressed herself against the concrete and listened carefully for several seconds, her head tilted in concentration. Then, she motioned for the others to join her. 4 guards inside the compound, she whispered. 2 near Building 2, 1 on patrol between Buildings 1 and 3, and 1 on the roof of Building 3. How can you tell? Walsh asked. Footsteps, radio chatter, and the smell of cigarette smoke, she replied matter-of-factly. The one on the roof is a smoker. The patrol guard has a limp in his left leg. The two by Building 2 are nervous. They're talking more than they should be. The SEALs exchanged glances. Sarah's ability to gather that much information from brief observation was impressive. Even by their standards. Morrison checked his watch. We have 6 hours until dawn. Let's move. James Walsh pulled out a small device that looked like a metal detector. He ran it along the base of the wall until it beeped softly, indicating he had found a section without buried sensors. Then he attached a small explosive charge to the concrete. The explosion was barely audible, more like a soft thump than a bang. But it was enough to create a hole large enough for a person to crawl through. One by one, the team members slipped through the hole and into the compound. They found themselves in a small courtyard surrounded by the 4 main buildings they had studied in the intelligence photos. Morrison hand-signaled for the team to spread out and take positions. Torres would cover the approach to Building 1. Rodriguez would watch Building 2. Walsh would handle Building 3. And Morrison would accompany Sarah to Building 4, where the hostages were supposedly being held. But as they began to move toward their positions, Sarah suddenly held up her hand in a stop signal. She tilted her head again, listening intently to something the others couldn't hear. Change of plans, she whispered. The hostages aren't in Building 4. How do you know? Morrison asked. Because Building 4 is empty. No voices, no movement, no body heat signatures. But Building 2 has at least 6 people in the basement level. Rodriguez looked skeptical. Body heat signatures? What kind of equipment are you using? Instead of answering, Sarah pointed to the small device on her belt. The hostages are in Building 2. Along with at least 3 guards. We need to adjust our approach. Morrison was faced with a difficult decision. His training told him to stick to the original plan. But Sarah's confidence was compelling, and if she was right about the hostages being in a different building, following the original plan would waste precious time. All right, he decided. We go with Building 2. Rodriguez, you're our point man since you know that building best. Walsh, can you get us through whatever security they have? Walsh nodded and began moving toward Building 2, but Sarah caught his arm. Wait, there's something else you need to know. She pulled out a tablet computer that none of them had seen before. On the screen was what appeared to be a 3-dimensional map of the entire compound, with small red dots moving through the buildings. What is that? Torres demanded. Real-time surveillance, Sarah replied. The dots are heat signatures. Red for hostiles. Blue for potential hostages. Look at Building 2. The screen showed 3 red dots on the ground floor, moving in patrol patterns, and 3 blue dots in the basement that weren't moving at all. Morrison stared at the display. How is this possible? We don't have satellite coverage in this area. It's not satellite, Sarah said quietly. It's something else. Before anyone could ask what she meant, the sound of vehicles approaching from outside the compound interrupted their conversation. Morrison counted at least 3 trucks, possibly more. Reinforcements, Rodriguez whispered. Someone must have detected our insertion. Sarah looked at her tablet again. The red dots were multiplying rapidly as armed men poured into the compound from the main gate. Within minutes, they would be completely surrounded. We have 2 choices, Sarah said calmly. We can abort the mission and try to extract, leaving the hostages behind. Or we can complete the mission despite the increased opposition. Morrison didn't hesitate. We came here to get those people out. That's what we're going to do. Then we do this my way, Sarah said. And you're going to see some things that you might find difficult to believe. She reached down to the device on her belt and pressed a series of buttons. Immediately, all the lights in the compound went out. Not just the exterior floodlights, but every light in every building went dark simultaneously. EMP device? Walsh asked. Something like that, Sarah replied evasively. But the SEALs noticed that their own electronic equipment, radios, night vision, GPS units, was still functioning perfectly. Sarah began moving toward Building 2 with a speed and confidence that seemed impossible in the complete darkness. The SEALs followed as best they could, but they found themselves struggling to keep up. What happened next would be burned into their memories for the rest of their lives. As they approached Building 2, they encountered the first group of guards. 3 armed men who were clearly disoriented by the sudden loss of power but still dangerous. The SEALs prepared for a firefight, but Sarah simply held up her hand again. "Stay here," she whispered. "Give me 30 seconds." Before Morrison could object, Sarah disappeared into the darkness. For a moment, the SEALs couldn't see or hear anything. Then they heard a series of soft sounds. A whisper of movement. A barely audible impact. Something that might have been a suppressed weapon firing. 30 seconds later, Sarah reappeared at their position. "Clear," she said simply. When they reached the spot where the guards had been standing, they found all 3 men unconscious on the ground. There were no bullet wounds, no obvious signs of trauma. They had simply been neutralized with surgical precision. "How did you?" Torres started to ask, but Sarah was already moving toward the building entrance. The door to Building 2 was heavy steel, secured with an electronic lock that should have been impossible to bypass. But Sarah approached it with the same confidence she had shown everything else. She placed her hand on the lock mechanism for perhaps 3 seconds, and the door clicked open. Inside the building, they encountered 2 more guards. This time, the SEALs were close enough to see what Sarah did to them. She moved like liquid shadow, flowing between the guards before they even realized she was there. Her movements were so fast and precise that they seemed almost supernatural. One moment the guards were standing alert. The next moment they were on the ground, unconscious. Walsh grabbed Morrison's arm. "Boss, what the hell is she?" Before Morrison could answer, they heard voices from the basement, American voices, scared and desperate. "Please, we don't know anything about military operations. We're just contractors working on a water purification project." "You lie," came an angry response in accented English. "Your government sent you to spy on our operations. You will tell us what you know, or you will die tonight." Sarah moved toward the basement stairs without hesitation. But as she started down, she turned back to the SEALs one last time. "What you're about to see," she said quietly, "can never be discussed outside of this team. Not with your commanding officers, not with your families, not with anyone. Do you understand?" The 4 SEALs nodded, though they had no idea what they were agreeing to. The basement was a single large room with concrete walls and no windows. 3 men in civilian clothes were tied to chairs in the center of the room, and 4 armed guards stood around them. One of the guards held a knife and was clearly preparing to use it. Sarah stepped into the room like she owned it. The guards spun toward her, raising their weapons, but they never got the chance to fire. What happened next defied everything the SEALs thought they knew about human capability. Sarah moved through the room like a force of nature, but not in any way they had ever seen before. Her movements were fluid and precise, but they were also impossibly fast. She seemed to anticipate each guard's actions before they made them, flowing around their weapons and striking with devastating accuracy. But more than her speed or precision, what stunned the SEALs was the way she seemed to control the very space around her. Guards would swing weapons at her, only to find that she was no longer where they thought she was. They would fire their guns, but the bullets seemed to pass through empty air. In less than 15 seconds, all 4 guards were on the ground. 3 were unconscious. The 4th was dead, his neck broken cleanly. Sarah immediately went to the hostages, cutting their bonds with a knife that seemed to appear in her hand from nowhere. "Are you injured?" she asked in the calm, professional voice they had heard in the briefing room. The 3 contractors, 2 men and a woman, all in their 40s, stared at her in shock. They had just watched a small woman single-handedly defeat 4 armed terrorists in a way that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Who are you?" one of them stammered. "Someone who's here to get you home," Sarah replied. "Can you walk?" As the hostages confirmed they were unhurt, the SEALs continued to stare at Sarah in amazement. They had seen some of the most elite fighters in the world, but they had never seen anything like what they had just witnessed. Morrison finally found his voice. "Ma'am, we need to talk about what just happened down there." Sarah was helping one of the contractors to his feet. "We need to get out of here first. The compound is surrounded, and more reinforcements are arriving every minute. How do you know that? Rodriguez asked. Sarah tapped her belt device again. Because I can see them. 23 hostiles outside the building, with more coming. We have about 3 minutes before they breach the basement. Walsh looked around the concrete room. There's only one way out. The stairs we came down. If they're waiting for us up there, we're trapped. Actually, there are 4 ways out of this room, Sarah said calmly. The stairs, the old drainage tunnel behind that wall, the ventilation shaft above our heads, and the maintenance access through the floor. The SEALs looked where she was pointing but saw only solid concrete walls. I don't see any tunnel, Torres said. Sarah walked to what appeared to be a blank section of wall and pressed her hand against it. Immediately, a section of the concrete slid aside, revealing a narrow tunnel that led away from the building. How did you know that was there? Morrison demanded. It wasn't in any of the intelligence reports. Because I can see things that other people can't, Sarah replied. And right now, I can see that we need to move immediately if we want to get out of here alive. As they prepared to enter the tunnel, leading the 3 rescued contractors to safety, the SEALs realized that everything they thought they knew about their mysterious team leader had been wrong. Sarah Chen wasn't just an experienced operative with classified training. She wasn't just someone who worked for a secret government agency. She was something else entirely, and they were about to find out exactly what that meant. The drainage tunnel was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for one person at a time. Sarah led the group through the underground passage with the same impossible confidence she had shown everything else, moving through pitch-black darkness as if she could see perfectly. Behind her, the 3 rescued contractors stumbled along as best they could, still in shock from their ordeal. The 4 Navy SEALs brought up the rear, their minds racing with questions about what they had just witnessed. After 10 minutes of crawling through the tunnel, they emerged into a small ravine approximately half a mile from the compound. In the distance, they could see lights and hear vehicles, as more terrorist reinforcements arrived at the facility they had just escaped. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison checked his GPS for their extraction point, while Sarah helped the contractors climb out of the drainage opening. All 3 civilians appeared to be in reasonable physical condition despite their captivity. The primary extraction point is 2 kilometers north, Morrison announced. But with all the activity at the compound, it might be compromised. Sarah was studying her mysterious device again, and the SEALs noticed that the display had changed. Instead of showing heat signatures inside buildings, it now displayed a wide area map with moving dots scattered across the landscape. The primary extraction point is clear, she said. But there are patrol vehicles moving along the main road that could cut us off if we take the direct route. Danny Torres couldn't contain himself any longer. Okay, enough. What is that thing and how does it work? Sarah looked at the device, then at the expectant faces of the SEALs. For a moment, she seemed to be debating something internally. It's called a tactical awareness enhancement system, she said finally. It processes multiple data streams: satellite imagery, electronic signals, electromagnetic signatures, even atmospheric disturbances, to create a real-time picture of the operational environment. Mike Rodriguez frowned. That kind of technology doesn't exist, at least not in any form that could be carried by one person. You're right, Sarah admitted. It doesn't exist for most people. Before anyone could ask what she meant by that, one of the rescued contractors, a man named David Palmer, spoke up. Ma'am, I need to ask you something. What you did back in that basement, that wasn't normal human capability. I've worked in dangerous places all over the world, and I've seen special forces operators from a dozen different countries, but I've never seen anything like what you just did. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the star-filled sky. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, softer, more personal than the professional tone she had maintained throughout the mission. Mr. Palmer, how much do you know about human genetic variation? The question caught everyone off guard. Palmer, who turned out to be a biomedical engineer, looked confused. I know that there's significant variation in human physical and cognitive capabilities. But But you assume that variation falls within certain predictable ranges, Sarah finished. Normal human strength, normal human speed, normal human sensory capability. She turned back to face the group. And in the moonlight, her eyes seemed to have an unusual quality to them. Not quite reflecting light the way normal eyes should. What if I told you that assumption was wrong? James Walsh stepped forward. Ma'am, what exactly are you saying? Instead of answering directly, Sarah held up her hand with the palm facing toward them. At first, the SEALs didn't see anything unusual. Then they noticed that her skin seemed to be giving off a very faint glow, barely visible in the darkness. 12 years ago, I was selected for a classified research program, she said quietly. The program was designed to push the boundaries of human performance beyond what anyone thought was possible. Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night air. What kind of research? Genetic enhancement, cybernetic integration, neurological optimization, technologies that officially don't exist, and programs that have no names. The glow from her hand was becoming more visible, and the SEALs realized that it was emanating from beneath her skin, as if there were some kind of internal light source. The program had a 97% failure rate, Sarah continued. Most subjects died during the enhancement process. Others suffered severe psychological breakdown. A few went completely insane. She lowered her hand, and the glow faded. 3 subjects out of nearly 200 survived the process with full functionality intact. I was one of them. The group stood in stunned silence, processing what she had just told them. The rescued contractors looked like they weren't sure whether to be terrified or amazed. The SEALs looked like they were questioning everything they thought they knew about the world. Danny Torres was the first to speak. So you're saying you're not entirely human? I'm saying I'm human plus something extra, Sarah replied. Enhanced reflexes that operate faster than normal neural transmission. Sensory capabilities that extend beyond the standard 5 senses. Physical strength and agility that exceed baseline human limits. She gestured toward the device on her belt. And the ability to interface directly with advanced technological systems through bio-cybernetic implants. Rodriguez shook his head. That's impossible. That's science fiction. 3 hours ago, you would have said that what you saw me do in that basement was impossible too, Sarah pointed out. But you watched it happen. Morrison was trying to process the implications. Ma'am, if what you're saying is true, then why are you here? Why are you running missions with regular military personnel, instead of, I don't know, leading your own special operations? Sarah's expression became darker. Because the program that created me was shut down 5 years ago. Not because it didn't work, but because the people in charge decided that enhanced humans were too dangerous to control. She began walking toward the extraction point. And the others followed. As they moved across the desert terrain, she continued her explanation. The other 2 survivors from the program didn't handle their enhancement as well as I did. One suffered a complete psychological break and had to be terminated. The other went rogue and started using his abilities for personal gain. Walsh caught up to walk beside her. So they shut down the entire program? They tried to. But by then, I had already been in the field for 7 years. I had established a record of successful missions and proven that I could operate within normal command structures without becoming a threat. She paused to check her device again. So they offered me a choice. I could submit to a process that would remove my enhancements and return me to baseline human status. Or, I could continue operating, but only on missions that were considered too dangerous or too important to risk normal personnel. Torres understood. That's why you're here. This isn't just a difficult mission. It's one they expected might require your special capabilities. Exactly, and it's why Admiral Richardson couldn't tell you about my background. My existence is classified at levels that most people in the military don't even know exist. As they reached the top of a small hill, they could see their extraction point in the distance, a flat area where a helicopter could land safely. But they could also see vehicle lights moving in their direction from multiple angles. We have company, Morrison observed. Sarah studied her device and frowned. 12 vehicles, approximately 60 personnel, converging on our location. They'll reach the extraction point before we do. The rescued contractor who had remained quiet until now, a woman named Dr. Jennifer Hayes, looked around nervously. So what do we do? Hide until they leave? We can't, Morrison replied. Our extraction window is only 30 minutes. If we miss it, the next opportunity isn't for 6 hours, and by then, half the Syrian army will be looking for us, Rodriguez added. Sarah was studying the tactical situation with an expression the SEALs had learned to recognize. She was calculating something that the rest of them couldn't see. There's another option, she said finally. What option? Palmer asked. Sarah looked at each of the SEALs in turn. I can clear the extraction point. But if I do that, you're going to see exactly why they call me Falcon. And once you see it, you can never unknow it. Morrison didn't hesitate. Do what you have to do. Sarah nodded and began removing equipment from her gear bag, equipment that none of them had seen before. First came what appeared to be a second device similar to the one on her belt, but larger and more complex. Then came something that looked like a combination of body armor and electronic circuitry. What is that? Walsh asked. Full enhancement activation gear, Sarah replied as she began putting on the equipment. For the past 12 years, I've been operating at maybe 30% of my actual capability. This allows me to access the rest. As she activated the equipment, the change was immediately visible. The faint glow they had noticed earlier became brighter, and her movements became even more fluid and precise than they had been in the basement. But more than that, something fundamental about her presence changed. The air around her seemed to shimmer slightly, and when she looked at them, her eyes reflected light like a nocturnal predator's. Stay here, she instructed. Give me 15 minutes. Then proceed to the extraction point. Torres grabbed her arm, then immediately let go when he felt how warm her skin had become. Ma'am, there are 60 hostiles down there, even with your abilities. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since they had met her, the smile reached her eyes. But instead of making her appear more human, it made her seem utterly alien. Petty Officer Torres, have you ever watched a falcon hunt? Before he could answer, she was gone. Not running, not moving quickly, simply gone. As if she had vanished into the darkness itself. What happened next was unlike anything the SEALs had ever witnessed, even in their most intense combat experiences. From their position on the hill, they could see the terrorist vehicles converging on the extraction point. They could see approximately 60 armed men taking positions around the landing zone. Then Sarah reached them. The SEALs couldn't see her directly. She was moving too fast and staying too low to be visible at that distance. But they could see the effects of her presence. Vehicles began exploding, not from external attacks but from something happening inside them. Groups of armed men would be standing in formation one moment and lying unconscious on the ground the next. Radio communications cut out entirely as electronic systems throughout the area simply stopped functioning. My God, Dr. Hayes whispered. It's like watching a natural disaster. But Morrison, who had observed countless combat situations, realized that what they were seeing wasn't random destruction. It was surgical, precise, and utterly controlled. Sarah was neutralizing threats in a specific order, creating corridors of movement, and leaving escape routes for any enemies who chose to retreat. She wasn't killing everyone, she was defeating them so completely and efficiently that resistance became pointless. The entire engagement lasted exactly 12 minutes. When it was over, the extraction point was clear, and the surviving terrorist forces were fleeing in whatever vehicles still functioned. Morrison's radio crackled to life. Extraction team, this is Falcon. Landing zone is secure. Recommend immediate pickup. As they made their way down the hill toward the extraction point, they found Sarah waiting for them. She had removed the enhancement equipment and returned to her normal appearance, but the SEALs noticed that she seemed tired in a way she hadn't been before. Ma'am, Walsh said quietly. How many of them did you? 18 fatalities, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. All of them were in situations where non-lethal neutralization wasn't possible. The rest will live, though some of them will probably need medical attention. Rodriguez looked around at the scene. Destroyed vehicles were scattered across the landscape, but there was surprisingly little evidence of the battle that had just taken place. It was as if a force of nature had swept through the area and left only carefully controlled destruction in its wake. "Now I understand the nickname," Torres said. Sarah looked at him questioningly. "Falcon," he explained. "Falcons don't just fly fast or see far. They hunt with surgical precision. They strike exactly when and where they need to, and they never miss their target." Sarah nodded slowly. "The enhancement process didn't just improve my physical capabilities. It changed how I process information, how I perceive spatial relationships, how I interact with my environment. I see patterns and possibilities that normal human cognition can't detect." She gestured toward the destruction around them. "I didn't fight 60 men. I solved a complex tactical equation with 60 variables, and then executed the solution." The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance interrupted their conversation. Their extraction aircraft was approaching, and soon they would be on their way back to safety. As they prepared for pickup, Morrison had one more question. "Ma'am, what happens now? Do you go back to your classified missions?" Sarah looked up at the approaching helicopter, then back at the 4 SEALs who had just learned one of the government's most closely guarded secrets. "That depends," she said, "on whether you can work with someone like me again, and whether you can keep what you've learned to yourselves." Danny Torres didn't hesitate. "Ma'am, you got those people out alive when nobody else could have done it. As far as I'm concerned, you're exactly the kind of person we want on our team." The other SEALs nodded in agreement. "Besides," Rodriguez added, "who would believe us if we told this story?" As the helicopter landed and the team prepared to extract with their rescued hostages, Sarah Chen allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced in years: acceptance. For 12 years, she had been a secret weapon, a classified asset, a problem to be managed. Tonight, for the first time since her enhancement, she had been part of a team. The rescued contractors were loaded onto the helicopter first, followed by the SEALs. As Sarah climbed aboard last, she took one final look at the Syrian desert where she had revealed her true nature to people who would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of their lives. Lieutenant Commander Morrison settled into the seat beside her as the helicopter lifted off. "Ma'am, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead. Do you ever regret it? The enhancement process? The life you've had to live because of it?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the desert landscape falling away beneath them. When she finally answered, her voice was thoughtful. "Commander, I've saved hundreds of lives in situations where no one else could have saved them. I've prevented terrorist attacks, stopped weapons smuggling operations, and rescued hostages from places that regular forces couldn't reach." She turned to look at him directly. "The enhancement process took away my chance at a normal life, but it gave me the ability to do things that matter in ways that most people never can." "Also," Morrison nodded, "so you don't regret it?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "I don't regret becoming Falcon. I regret that it took so long to find people who could accept both sides of who I am." As the helicopter flew through the night sky toward the extraction point where a larger aircraft waited to take them home, Sarah Chen closed her eyes and allowed herself to rest. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities to use her unique abilities in service of something larger than herself. But tonight, she was part of a team. And for someone who had spent 12 years operating in the shadows, that was more valuable than any enhancement technology could ever be. The 4 Navy SEALs who had witnessed her true capabilities would keep her secret, just as she had kept the secrets of countless other classified operations. But more than that, they would remember what they had learned about the extraordinary individuals who operated beyond the boundaries of normal human capability. They would remember why some people called her Falcon, and they would understand that sometimes, when ordinary solutions weren't enough, the world needed someone who could do the impossible. In the years that followed, the story of that mission would become legend within the small community of people cleared to know about it. Not because of the tactical success, though that was significant, not because of the lives saved, though that was important, but because it proved that even the most enhanced human beings still needed something that no technology could provide: the trust and acceptance of their teammates. Sarah Chen had been designed to be the perfect solo operator. But on that night in the Syrian desert, she had discovered something more valuable than perfection. She had found her place as part of a team. This country is numb. Discovered something more valuable. This country is noun 22-3, and that was worth more than any nickname, no matter how well earned it might be.